This is Reasonable Doubt with your hosts, Mark Garrigus and Gary Smith.
Well, welcome to the big show. And why do we have the big guest? We have Sara Azari returning. Sara, how are you?
Good, Mark. How are you? It's always good to be with you guys.
It's always good to see you. I thought when Gary and I were talking about guests, I said, I thought I was done with Murdaugh, but on my Twitter feed, it is Sara doing battle over Murdaugh post-Murdaugh. It's unbelievable.
Well, no, Sara is being terrorized over Murdaugh.
So do you want to set it up for those who aren't in the weeds, who thought that he was already sentenced and gone? We're not talking Murdaugh anymore?
I mean, look, there's so many issues pending. Obviously, he has the appeal. His attorneys have made a motion for attorney's fees against the receivership. I mean, it's peanuts. It's $160,000, which obviously you and I both know that the transcripts alone cost $26,000. There's, all of the financial crimes. There's going to be an investigation into any potential jury misconduct. I mean, there's a slew of things, and then the Stephen Smith issue that really, frankly, Mark, it would have been a local. I mean, listen, I'm all for Miss Smith getting closure. It's horrible to lose your son and not know what really happened. But SLED has come out and said that this was a murder, that this was not a hit and run. And yet, this story got legs because of the rumor that Buster Murdaugh was somehow connected to the death. So, how many roadside things do we have happening around the country that never get national headlines? The only reason it made headlines is because of the Murdaugh thing. So there's all these side stories that started with rumors and lies and defamatory stories that ran on podcasts and documentaries, and those are still going. And
that's what I was going to say, is that, it seems that a cottage industry has sprung up here. And as soon as it looked like that industry was starting to go away, now all of a sudden, everyone in that world is just clamoring over this.
Yeah, it's like the economy of Murdaugh, so many people have made a name, got a Twitter check mark, selling merchandise. I mean, it's quite interesting. And the auction.
And then there was a GoFundMe, right? Explain that.
The GoFundMe for Stephen Smith?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really interesting because Sandy Smith, this is not the first GoFundMe in this case. So you had the Shelley, I think Shelley Smith, the Murdaugh's mom's caretaker. She had a GoFundMe right after her testimony. Another person, I can't remember now, during the trial started a GoFundMe. And then you have Stephen Smith's mother, who did a GoFundMe with a $15,000 goal to raise money to exhume his body. Last I checked, she was at $90,000. Yeah. The claim is that she's going to give this money to scholarship because she doesn't need all this money. I don't know, because people that have looked into it, there's no scholarship set up yet. So it's unclear, what's happening, if the lawyers are getting paid. But, look, I'm asking you this, Mark. Number one, in South Carolina, to exhume a body, there's no statutory mechanism to get an order for this, okay? But a 1915 case says that the body is so holy that it is to be left undisturbed, even when it's earth to earth, dust to dust, that kind of thing. And it cites to the Bible. So now that SLED has said this was a murder, what more can you gain by digging up a body that's been embalmed and buried for 8 years? Like, what else can you find out, even if you did get this order?
Yeah, it's the whole thing is wild, and I'm not so sure I tend to agree with you, but for kind of the mania surrounding the father, you wouldn't. Basically, they're visiting the sins of the father upon the son.
Absolutely. And by the way, the son is a victim. The son has lost.
Well, we lost sight of that during this trial. People were excoriating him for sitting behind his father. Yeah. People were excoriating him for not being supportive, if you will, supportive of the prosecution of his father. they've lost complete sight of who truly was the victim.
Well, and then the chyrons, when they run the Stephen Smith story, they say, is he the next Murdaugh murderer? What? Based on what? I mean, it's all rumor that he was even connected with this death. But the guy's trying to find a job. He can't find a job, and I wonder why. He's completely been tarnished. And then, you lose your parents, you lose your brother. And I mean, Alec is in prison for the rest of his life. His mom's dead, his brother's dead. And all he got, Mark, is $530,000. I mean, he doesn't have it yet, but that's all he's walking away with, because he essentially settled the boating accident lawsuit. He was also sued for giving his brother his ID to go get beer or whatever that caused the boating accident.
Can you imagine anybody ever doing that?
I don't know. I would use my sister's ID to go to clubs, back in the day. I got away with ID. But anyway, so he wanted to get rid of the lawsuit. So all he's getting is $530,000. I feel terrible for this guy, Yeah,
it's awful. So before we let you go, there was something that I wanted Gary to show you, and I want to get your reaction to this. This is the setup is this is a Senate hearing on a nominee for the district court, and I believe this gentleman is a magistrate currently.
He's a magistrate. No,
I think he's a U.S. magistrate. This is a guy I generally do not agree with, Senator Kennedy, but right. He is a trial lawyer. But I look at what he does with this gentleman.
Tell me how you analyze a Brady motion.
How I analyze a Brady motion?
Yes.
Senator, in my 4.5 years on the bench, don't believe I've had the occasion to address a Brady motion in my career.
Do you know what a Brady motion is?
Senator, in my time on the bench, I've not had occasion to address that, and so it's not coming to mind at the moment what a Brady motion is.
Do you recall the U.S. Supreme Court case, Brady v. Maryland?
I do recall the name of the case, Senator, yes.
And what did it hold?
I believe that the Brady case, Senator, I believe the Brady case involves something regarding the Second Amendment. It is not. I've not had occasion to address that. If that issue were to come before me, I would certainly analyze that Supreme Court precedent and apply it as I would need to the facts in front of me.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I know.
This can't be real.
I know. I don't know what to say. Before Sunday, the Sunday show, I'm going to do a little research. I do not understand if it's true as reported that he's a magistrate judge. I don't get it. I just don't get how
you don't even have to be a judge.
No, I know that.
Well, that's
the sad part.
I understand he's never, as a magistrate, had a Brady issue, maybe. But as a law school graduate, I mean, how do you not know? It's like the one case you always remember, whether you work in that field or not. The Brady Bunch? I don't know. This is crazy.
What's so crazy is, for those who listen to this show, they know that my dogs are Brady and Giglio. So it's just, I know that I'm biased, but given the fact, this is kind of my thought process on this. Given the fact that criminal takes precedence over civil, and given the fact that criminal is the lion's share then of your calendar, it would strike me as that you should, and by the way, if you're prepped for your hearing, you would know Booker, Apprendi, Brady, Giglio. I mean,
Giglio,
Cunningham. I mean, I would think you would know these cases.
I mean, yeah, and Brady is even more so than Booker and Giglio. It's like, it's monumental. I mean, it's what you never forget from your law school experience, right? And in
so many ways, Brady is what differentiates the prosecutor's duty from the defense. I mean, the defense, as you know, zealously defend. But what's Brady?
Right. It's unbelievable. And I mean, I look, being a magistrate judge, you're usually dealing with detention and things like that. I get that he may not have had the issue that he like presided over the issue, or decided the issue, but to not know it is outrageous. This has to be real though, Mark, right?
I have no reason to doubt it. I will tell you, but I have used Brady in the context of detention hearings, which I'm sure you have as well. Which I mean, I just the whole thing makes no sense. There's got to be more to it because it cannot be this. This just it's breathtaking. Is I guess what I'm saying.
You got to keep me posted as to what you find out.
I will. If it's really good, I'm bringing you back Sunday. Okay.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Now I know. By the way, I know you had a hot date. Thank you for.
No, I'm going to a birthday party.
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. I'll see you.
Have a good weekend. Good
to
see you,
Sarah. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to our next guest, our very own Reasonable Doubt top G, Tina Glandian, who's not only, somebody had commented, Tina, that you only represent alpha males. And I'm going to tick them
as my latest client. How do you feel about that statement?
I like that. I embrace it. And we're going to talk about your other client first, and then we'll talk about your latest client. Your other client, obviously, for those who don't know or living under a rock, are the Tate brothers, who are being held in I guess incommunicado would not be accurate, but they are clearly in custody in Romania.
With very limited communication. They are still in preventative arrest in Romania since now the end of December. And so they just actually had their fourth extension granted, the prosecutor's fourth extension last week, which was really disappointing. So we have a couple things coming up this week. About 10 days ago, our team had made an application for bail, basically for each of the brothers separately, but on the same grounds that preventative arrest at this point is unnecessarily harsh. There are other options there, such as house arrest, and that at the very least they should be allowed out on one of those grounds. And the court rejected that. Separately, the prosecution did make their application to extend their detention until the end of April, which was granted. Again, what's most frustrating is in all of this, there's been not only no charges filed, but no new evidence, no new alleged victims, nothing like that. They just have extended it on some perceived argument that they are going to flee or that they are kind of a danger to public order. So we have two hearings coming up this next week. We're appealing both of those rulings. There's a hearing on Tuesday, the 28th, and that's the hearing on the denial of the bail. And then there's another hearing on Friday, and that's to appeal the extension of the detention.
We're going to see you again in Romania?
We'll see. Unfortunately, when I'm there now, I can't participate in these hearings. So I'll be there if needed, but for now, we're letting the Romanian team handle it.
Where is the U.S. Embassy in all of this? I mean, that's something that to me, if it's a cause célèbre, that usually, like anything else in life and clearly in the criminal law, I've talked about it for almost 10 years on this show. When there's sunlight or any something like that, you tend to get more action. So where are we with that?
The embassy has finally taken some interest in this case. I think they've seen how prolonged this detention has been. And so they have now gotten involved. And that's a process that we're hoping really puts some pressure on and gets the brothers out. There's the case, I don't know if you guys followed the Brittany Griner case, but that was one where the embassy ended up, and that took a while too in that case. I think it was about 8 months into her detention that they were able to finally trade her and do a kind of a prisoner swap or to get her out.
It's interesting in that case. I was talking to somebody today about it. The focus in that case was on Brittany, as it should be, obviously, as the American citizen. But there is a viewpoint of that really what was the thing that got that going was the fact that the lawyer, and I wish I had his name, I'd give him a shout out. He was a New York lawyer for Victor Bout, who was the arms dealer who had been sentenced, I believe, in the New York federal court. He had really kind of mapped out a course of action, and I think I don't know that he wants the credit or nothing else, but I certainly would say or take the position that he was one of the main architects and got this thing going, if you will, because that was very controversial after the fact, but it remains that he was traded for Brittany.
I can help you out there. It's Steve Zissou, according to what I've found on the internet, a Queens-based lawyer.
Yes. So Steve, shout out to you. I'm going to give you credit because I think you had a lot more to do with this than people give any credrit to.
But one thing to know is, well, in that case, it's interesting because that was somebody who had actually been convicted. And here we're talking about a situation where the Tate brothers haven't even been charged with any crimes. So
how do you just keep somebody in custody if you're a member in one of the European Union nations without charges for what, 4 30-day periods, so 120 days? I mean, in the U.S., so that you understand, we've got a right to speedy trial. And in state court, that generally is going to be 60 days after a probable cause proceeding. Federal court is 70 some odd days.
Yeah, so you can go to trial here before you can be charged in Romania. Again, they have that entire 6-month period. So we're coming up on the 120 at the end of April, but they could still, in theory, extend it 2 additional times. So they get to extend for up to a total of 6 months without filing charges, which for us is a crazy procedure.
And at that point, what would happen if we did get to the 180 days? Then would they would either have to file charges or let them go, or is there a third door?
Well, they would have to either file charges or let them go. But if they do file charges, they get to again detain them. I think how it works there is they get to detain them for if they still find them to be a risk. So assuming they maintain the position that they have been taking this entire time, they could theoretically hold them for half of the potential sentence of the crimes that they'll be charged with, that they would be charged with.
Half of the sentence, meaning the ultimate sentence, their maximum?
Exactly.
Okay. That's something. Whoa. Okay. Then Tina, Gary, I'm sorry, Gary, you had a question?
No, I was just that was a surprising answer. That seems like a lot of latitude.
Yes, and it's a lot of time. It's a lot of time somebody could be detained without a conviction. So between the 6 months that they can hold somebody without filing charges and then the 50% of the potential sentence, that's a very lengthy detention, again, for somebody who hasn't been convicted of crimes.
That's just wild. Now, speaking of other alpha males that you represent, you filed another lawsuit today?
It was 2 days ago on the 22nd.
Okay, and that would be?
On behalf of you, Mr. Garagos.
And we're not waiving any attorney-client privilege, but I'll ask you, Gary, do you have the Bloomberg headline on this case? My pet peeve in life after 40 years is that I'm anybody who's listened to this knows when I'm referred to as a celebrity lawyer, but I guess headline. That is the headline in this article. So why don't you? There you go, celebrity attorney sues LA Times over Armenian insurance stories, which, by the way, to this day sticks in my craw because, Tina, you explain what's going on because you've been with the firm for almost close to 20 years. You don't even look that old.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm pretty much as old as these cases are, which is the same year I joined your firm, the same year that the case was filed, interestingly enough. So, yeah, we filed this lawsuit after we gave the LA Times, I don't know how many opportunities to right their wrongs. So they started this campaign and, all of this it's an interesting read. So I would encourage anybody who's interested in the topic to actually read the complaint. It's long, but it really, I think, details everything that occurred since 2021, where it seems like they started this campaign of targeting Mark for I mean, the theory is that they missed the boat on breaking the Tom Girardi story. And once that story broke, they covered that, as frequently as possible. And they somehow thought that if this was what happened with Girardi, that Mark, being another prominent attorney in California, this must also be the case with him. And they just decided what the narrative would be.
A couple of differences. I realize both of our names start with a G and are 7 letters. I understand that we both have housewives who like to spend time in Beverly Hills. And I understand that we're both so-called prominent lawyers. But what's so crazy about this, these people, is the insanity of their theories. I mean, I started hearing from a woman, a widow, who was a retiree, who was my banker 15 years ago, and they showed up at her house and were banging on her door. I had a client, Tina knows well, who is knocking on the door of 80, recovering from a heart attack, and they were trying to and he's telling me what these people are crazy. They're making these wild accusations. I had lawyers who used to work for me who they tried to get to violate attorney-client privilege. It was like the wildest things I've ever heard by 3 reporters. I mean, Paul Pringle, who I've got a nickname for, but I won't repeat it here. You can probably figure it out. Was a reporter who trespassed at the house, trying to get into the house. Like, who does that in the middle of the night? And then Harriet Ryan, who's a Nancy Grace protege. I mean, that was her claim to fame. She was at Court TV trying to be another Nancy Grace. And this other guy, Matt Hamilton, who is equally as inept and kind of dense as Harriet. And no matter what you told them in real time, and I'd pick up the phone, I would talk to them, I would try to get through. But mind you, what happened was, here I'm telling the whole story. Sorry, Tina, but I get so worked up.
No, that's okay. But I just want you to contextualize that this didn't start off about the Armenian genocide insurance litigation. This started with pretty much, let's see if we can find it.
It was USC. I'll tell you where it happened. I had a client who I protected the client. They kept basically calling her names. They kept saying my client was a source for their story, which they all got much accolades and attention about, but they were denigrating my client. I wasn't going to let them do that. And then they just lied. They put out Pringle himself and I've got the emails where he just lies through his teeth. And you know what? He let him sue me because I'm going to say Paul Pringle is a liar, and I'm not the only one who says it. He published a book, and 4 of his former editors and associates all said he's a lying sack. And Harriet Ryan is just. Where do I even start with her as a reporter? She's Pulitzer Prize winning. They should recall her Pulitzer Prize.
But they basically tried. I mean, the story here is that they tried for a long time to find something on Mark by contacting a lot of, again, as he said, his former banker from 15 years ago, former lawyers that worked at the firm, several judges, priests, all sorts of people. And when they came up short and nobody gave them what they were hoping to hear, then they dredged up this really old case, which is from 2005. And it was a very complex class action because it involved a settlement board that was in France. And there were, I don't even know how many documents, but
they find a couple of disgruntled people who didn't get paid in a class action, as if I was the one who was approving or denying class actions. And they go and they get disgruntled people to rewrite history and ignores the fact that I was the one who exposed all of the defalcations. It's really astonishing.
Yeah, and how it went down is they contacted both Mark and Brian Kabatek, who was his co-class counsel in the litigation, and they asked, it was 64 really, really burdensome questions about a case that's almost 20 years old. So you can only imagine how difficult it is to remember specific transactions. They wanted to know where, specific checks went. And they took the time at great expense of both our office and Brian Kabatek's office spent an enormous amount of time pulling together this information in the middle of trial schedules, and everybody's busy and nobody's getting paid to do this. And everybody dropped what they were doing to satisfy these reporters and to show them that they were absolutely wrong on the path that they were. And we gave them all sorts of documentation, and they just wouldn't relent. They published the story anyway. It's so defamatory when you read the entirety of the article. And when you compare it, we have, one letter in specific where there's 24 really detailed, it's a 24-page, letter to the 64 questions, and it's really detailed answers. And when you just look side by side as to the story they published and what the answers were and how they cherry picked and twisted the words, I think it's kind of a slam dunk here.
Yeah, and they hide behind or they're going to hide behind the anti-SLAPP, and you know what? I'll take that risk. That's why that's why they get away with what they get away with. Somebody tweeted today, they're already morally bankrupt, Mark. Take them down and make them financially bankrupt. And there's a point there. The people complain about the media. This was the media. This was media malpractice on steroids, and I plan on holding them accountable. Thank you, Tina Glandian, for letting me join your stable of alpha males. I hope.
Well, I was going to say, sadly, I firsthand saw the effect that the reporting had on you, because this was your, I would say, the proudest you had been of anything in your career was the prosecution of these cases, which was very, very challenging because they were so old and they seemed like lost causes. And you and Brian really did, a tremendous job settling those cases for the amount of money you did. And then to have people come in who don't understand what the process was, who don't know the facts, and who were just intent on smearing your name with the publication of this. And it's complex. So a lot of people reading it won't understand even all of the kind of nuances in the transactions and what took place, but it certainly leaves an impression that you guys were responsible for mishandling money, and it's not fair. And I saw the effect it had on you. And
and one of the things that I will tell you that betrays by the way, we've got a declaration from a professor at Loyola Law School who they also engaged in a defamation campaign. I've got a sworn declaration from him as to what they said and what they did.
They accused you guys of criminal activity, you and Brian. So
yeah. So guess what? Now I'm accusing them, and I brought the receipts, so I can hardly wait to get past SLAPP and slap the holy bejesus out of them. I'm sure I'll see this. Oh, by the way, Gary, you will love this. They actually listened to reasonable doubt.
I can see that right here in the 81st paragraph.
Oh, look at this.
Anyone who wants to go read the entire complaint, it references his weekly podcast, not by name, but we all know what they're talking about.
We can amend, Gary. I could amend and add reasonable doubt if you want.
Yeah, because I told him, I said the Biden move was a political symbol, which now recognized the Armenian genocide, which now opened the doors, because if they had known, if this idiot squad had understood the legality of it, the one case that we didn't win on was a case where they said because Obama did not recognize the genocide, that executive action could not be overturned by virtue of our judicial actions.
That it was a political question, basically.
Right. Now, once Biden recognized the genocide, that undercuts that opinion, that Ninth Circuit opinion. By the way, I argued the case in the Ninth Circuit. I argued to the in-bank because the decision had flipped 2-1. They then brought out the in-bank. So it was very important at the time when it was Gary, you and I and Adam discussed it.
Yeah.
They listened to it, and they mention it at the bottom of one of their articles about now I was going to file lawsuits. And it's starting to click that maybe there was more to their agenda, and I'll just leave that right there because otherwise Tina will get mad because
we have discovery. Don't worry, Mark.
I know, and we'll get to it. But it has been the reason this has already resonated in just 2 days is the community knows, the Armenian community knows that the LA Times has been one of the worst purveyors of Azari and Turkish propaganda. They have either deliberately ignored or engaged in the both sidesism. They have a history, by the way. I mean, they were forced at the same time I was filing these lawsuits and settling this case in 2006. The LA Times in 2006 in real time, I don't know if you remember this, Tina, they were still calling it the alleged Armenian genocide. That's how bad this once proud publication was. So I can hardly wait to get all these people under oath. I'm going to get off my soapbox and
well,
I'm going to zen on a Friday. What do you say, Tina? Tina, our top G of G&G. Will you come back after I believe there's 2 hearings next week, correct?
Tuesday and Friday. Yeah, I'm happy to come back whenever you guys want me.
Great.
Well, we've got a lot of G's here. We got a Garrigus, a Glandian, a Gary.
And a Gary, yeah.
A lot of G's. Thank you, Tina G.
Thank you, Tina.
Of course.
Well, welcome. This is a guest that we have not had in quite a while, but not for a lack of his podcasting. My business partner, my law partner, my closest confidant, Ben Meiselas, who has, along with his 2 brothers, Brett and Jordy, founded the Midas Touch podcast. And yesterday, I saw our other friend of the show, Karen Friedman Agnifilo on MSNBC, and she was identified as podcast host Midas Media Network as well. So quite a little empire you're building over there, Ben. Welcome back.
Good to be here on Reasonable Doubt. Really, this is where it all started. And I remember the early roots and the early days of Reasonable Doubt very well.
Yeah, almost 10 years ago. So I thought today, Friday, because you know how much we love to get to Friday in the finish line. Gary's heard that a million times.
Absolutely.
That I thought we would talk because the expectation was this whole week that Trump would get indicted in the state court in New York. I think that the reason for that was, and I think Karen was the one who kind of explained it to me. I readily admit state court criminal in Manhattan is like, I always liken it to the bar in the Star Wars movie. It's a different place. I mean, it is that alien. And Karen had told me and told us in the audience that the invitation to Trump to testify is the basically penultimate act before the indictment comes. You don't have that, obviously, I think I explained in California. Then you combine that with Trump tweeting he was going to get arrested on Tuesday, which never made sense to me in the sense of a strict arrest, because it's a state court case. They're not going to bust into Mar-a-Lago and deal with Secret Service. So I don't know how he's going to get arrested. I guess in the common parlance, as opposed to surrendering or whatever you want to say. I guess technically that could be an arrest. But what's your observation as to what's happening? Why the delay?
I think one of the things that Karen Friedman Agnifilo said also is you really got to prepare for this, right? It's an unprecedented event. Time still remains on the side of Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg in terms of the statute of limitation not yet expiring. So I think he wants to dot all his I's, cross all of his T's, make sure his office is safe. Not only is it unprecedented in the fact that it would be the first time a former president is indicted, but the way Donald Trump is acting is completely unprecedented. I mean, calling Alvin Bragg a scum, calling Alvin Bragg an animal, calling for death and destruction, posting a photo of himself holding a baseball bat depicting him bludgeoning Alvin Bragg, which he subsequently deleted, which may actually give rise, and Karen Friedman Agnifilo said this, to an inciting a riot count as well. And so, and there are real consequences to that. There's been multiple multiple death threats. Someone sent a letter to Alvin Bragg's office on Friday saying, "I'm going to kill you, Alvin Bragg," with a white powdery substance, which turned out to be harmless, but nonetheless, the threat was made. Russian trolls are calling bomb threats in on a daily basis. And so Trump's threats are having real world consequences as well. And I think Alvin Bragg is considering all of this, but putting the safety of his office first and foremost. And by the way, I also host a podcast called Political Beatdown with Michael Cohen, where we get some good firsthand insight. And Cohen says he hasn't been called to be a rebuttal witness again to Robert Costello, who the Manhattan District Attorney's Office called, which also led me to believe that the Manhattan District Attorney's Office didn't feel that Robert Costello's testimony last week caused any significant injury to their presentation.
So that's fascinating because and you anticipated obviously where I was headed. So when you get the invitation, when the DA gives the invitation, like I say, this is not something that happens in a lot of other jurisdictions, but it happens in New York. You get this invitation. So they obviously, you most times you would decline that invitation, although there have been cases where defendants or the accused, they're not defendants yet unless there's an indictment, have actually gone in and testified. I've done it once with a client. I know Harlan has done it once or twice. So they sent in Costello. Costello was either an advisor or at least an attorney-client privilege had arguably, not necessarily, but arguably been formed with your other podcast partner, Michael Cohen. In fact, they, at one point, I don't know at whose behest, Michael had waived that. Costello was put in there presumably at the behest of the Trump team to impugn Michael Cohen. And because the Trump team, I believe, as part of their defense, wanted to show that he said one thing then, he's saying something else now, you can't believe him, get that in front of the grand jury. Now, Costello came out of that, and the witnesses, one of these kind of raging arguments for years, but it's already been settled, was grand jury secrecy. Prosecutors used to, in the old days, say the witnesses couldn't talk, but that's been laid to rest. So Costello came out, and Costello said, they barely asked me any questions, and I basically told them that they had cherry-picked documents. Do I have that right?
Yeah, and so Costello, I think, went in there with a plan, and as the Mike Tyson expression is, everyone has a plan until they're punched in the face. So Costello was going to go in there with hundreds of documents and make this presentation, and then I think the grand jury just had a few questions and then see you later.
Right, and when he came out and did that, then my guess is, just knowing prosecutors like I do, that the prosecution wanted to make sure that whatever this presentation was, mind you, this is not unheard of. When Michael Jackson, when we knew there was a grand jury, Ben Brofman and I put together binders of information that we delivered to the grand jury, and we wanted the grand jury to see. I'm not so sure that the Manhattan DA, who is they've got a lot of sharp guys there. I'm not so sure that they didn't say, okay, time out. We're going to put those documents together. We'll present those documents so that there's not an argument of hide the balsa later, or so to speak. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that they probably previewed before Costello came in everything that Costello was going to say. Look, it is not a secret that at some point in time, Michael Cohen was Donald Trump's lawyer and was acting in furtherance of Donald Trump's ultimate scheme. And that's Michael Cohen's presentation, in essence, which was, yeah, I did these things on his behalf. So you charged me, but you should have charged the person as well who I was doing this for. So frankly, I think it's the first thing that the grand jury heard, and they wanted to introduce, here are the witnesses that you're going to hear. Here's where Michael Cohen fits in. Here's where Stormy Daniels fits in. Here's what the actual documents show. And let's not forget, ultimately, this case is a document-heavy case, although there's not a lot of hot docs when you think about it, but you can see the payment, you can see the checks, you can see the corporation that was opened up, you get the testimony, you make the presentation, and I think it's a fairly seamless case. But yeah, the prosecution would be completely moronic if they were going to hide the ball and act like the history didn't happen. But to me, the history is known. You know, I like that Donald Trump, and I don't like it, but it's humorous that him and the right-wing MAGA crew is, you know, they're posting all of these documents as though they've uncovered it for the first time. Like, aha, here was the letter that Michael Cohen wrote in 2018. Like, if we were following that, you know, he wrote that letter in 2018.
So this is my, if I obviously look at these things from a criminal defense standpoint, and if I'm the prosecutor, or if I'm somebody who has a grand scheme to indict Trump, to take him off the field, so to speak, I certainly don't think I would start with this case. I think this is of the 3 or 4 cases. I don't think that they're going to. I could be wrong. I don't want to make necessarily predictions on prosecutions, but I think the classified docs lost a lot of air when the Biden and then the Pence situation came about. I think the Georgia case has got, to my mind, that is a tough case to defend, and I say that in this sense: you've got him on tape. You're going to get jury instructions, presumably, that'll go first of all to a petit jury, and what he is asking, he's going to have to get up there and talk about what he meant when he was telling the officials to go get me 11,000 more votes. That, to me, is a case that you can, as a prosecutor, you can present, and that would force your client to get up there and explain it away. This case, I think, could be tied up. When I say this case, the Manhattan DA case, I think there's so many defenses to this. I think there's so many issues, the kind of the hybrid, what I call the Frankensteinian compilation of theories, that I just don't know that if I were prosecuting these cases, or if I was coordinating. And by the way, anybody who doesn't think that the prosecutors are talking amongst themselves is naive. They obviously are, and I just think this is the weakest of the cases. What do you say?
Well, I think the Manhattan District Attorney's Office is still, if you take them at their word, they're investigating the criminal version of what New York Attorney General Letitia James is pursuing in the civil case, which is set to go to trial on October 2nd of 2023. And that's for the fraudulent valuation scheme over a decade, where it's alleged the Trump organization, Donald Trump and his adult children, fraudulently gave these valuations of these properties that had far lower appraisal values, and they inflated it to get these benefits from insurance companies, from lenders, and in terms of other tax benefits. And Alvin Bragg says he's still pursuing that case as well. So let's assume, for the sake of argument, you're right, and this case is the weakest, but it will get tied up. Look what Donald Trump's done already this week. Look at all the unforced errors that he's made, even with the mere threat of a possible indictment looming. He's potentially walked into other criminal charges. Now, on the one hand, you could have Alvin Bragg's a complete 8-dimensional chess mastermind. On the other hand, Donald Trump is the exact opposite. He's got the Mierdas touch and just is the biggest idiot ever, and continues to bring on more and more criminal potential crimes he could be charged with through the threats that he's making. But ultimately, assume you're right. Assume that this case does get ultimately tied up in various appeals and other types of procedures that can make this drag on and on and on. Alvin Bragg, meanwhile, is still criminally investigating, the fraud valuation case. That has a civil trial that goes October 2nd, 2023. You have the E. Jean Carroll civil rape and defamation case, which goes
is
to trial
in 3 weeks, right?
April 25th, where Judge Kaplan has ordered an anonymous jury. Then you're going to have Fawny Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney, file. Then you're going to have Jack Smith file something, probably much heavier on the financial crimes relating to the insurrection than people think. He was the head of the Public Integrity Division, and that is his specialty. But I think there'll be other charges brought there as well. And Alvin Bragg then kind of gets the credit for being the first. He could evaluate what happens in the New York Attorney General's case, still bring those charges as another case in a superseding indictment, but doesn't let this clock run out. And so this could all be by chance. Alvin Bragg could have been like, look, first we're going to go after the Trump organization, get those 17 felony convictions, then let's file this discrete one, then let's go for the grand slam. But you have to admit, it is coalescing in a way that is, at the very least, completely freaking Donald Trump out. And he's making every misstep that you would probably, as a criminal defense lawyer, be shaking your head if you ever represented someone like that.
It's interesting when you talk about, so the people understand the superseding indictment. If you're not in the weeds, one of the things, it's a prosecutorial tool that is used all the time. It's interesting to me. They first went to trial, that office, the Manhattan DA, against the Trump organization, and they used the accountant who to cooperate and to kind of tag the Trump organization. That was kind of almost a test run, if you will, because they then got jurors to come out. And the jurors, I mentioned this to Gary, it reminded me of a case I had tried against the city of Glendale, where the jurors came out afterwards and they said, why didn't you have the district attorney at the table? We would have found them liable too. And this was basically what the jurors said in the Trump organization. If you had Trump there, we would have convicted him too. So I think that gives wind at the back. But long way of setting up for the fact that if they start to get in trouble, and I can think of 10 different ways that they can in the case that at least has been out there in the public, because we don't know. There's a lot of speculation as to what the case is, what the theory is that the grand jury's looking at. If it is a false expense report that is a misdemeanor that is then elevated or upgraded to a felony on the basis of the cover-up, I understand it. But the prosecutor can always supersede on the case that Ben just detailed. And that is the threat that the prosecutor and the leverage that the prosecutor has. And I understand I'm the first one in the door if you're Alvin Bragg. And also I understand, just like you don't want to be either a Trump or a Trump aficionado indicted in Washington, D.C. I think the last place that Trump wants to be tried next to Washington, D.C. would be Manhattan. Wouldn't you agree?
I would absolutely agree. And even with the facts, I mean, we're talking about, at the most basic level, paying hush money payments to a porn star that you had sex with, and then you wanted to cover it up, and you had sex with the porn star while your new wife just gave birth to your first child. Like, you kind of look like a disgusting person, and then you're out there saying no affair and calling Stormy Daniels horse face. I mean,
which, by the way, she does take in stride, get the pun, and actually has a great deal of fun with the horse face. And she was talking about sitting on her horse ranch the other day in one of the tweets. I think she takes a lot of grief, and people call her skank, and she embraces it and turns on it. I don't know. I just think of the three cases, that one gives me the most pause in terms of why do you bring this thing. I also think there's a legit statute of limitations issue here. And interestingly, for Donald Trump, just like in other areas, in New York, the COVID state of emergency tolling the statute of limitations may end up getting tested.
I agree with you. I think that the statute of limitations is running up. And look, I think Alvin Bragg, again, we don't know all the facts. We know, though, that Alvin Bragg did not pursue the Cy Vance case immediately regarding the broader financial crimes. That's why you had Mark Pomerantz and Carrie Dunn, the special prosecutors that Cy Vance, the former district attorney in Manhattan, brought in. They resigned. And I think you have Alvin Bragg pursuing a very methodical strategy. And, you know, whether he is playing 8-dimensional chess or it's just working out this way, I think we should give him credit because he is playing it where, to your point, and what I had said before that, do the test run against the Trump organization, see how Trump's lawyers react, see how the jury reacts. The jury hated Trump's lawyers. They hated the presentation. They hated the Trump witnesses, and they really wanted Trump to be criminally indicted. That's what the lesson learned from that case is. So then you pursue this next one with Stormy Daniels, which you kind of move, you move a little bit further, you inch a little bit closer to the end zone, and then you can always have the superseding indictment. But again, this is not happening in a vacuum because you have Fulton County criminal investigations, you have special counsel Jack Smith's 2 criminal investigations and grand juries. People don't talk about this one, but you have multiple Southern District of New York criminal investigations into Trump media, including a recent money laundering.
Was that in connection? I read something on that. Was that in connection with the SPAC?
That's in connection with the SPAC. So Patrick Orlando, who's the chairperson of the SPAC and CEO, was just fired for this, was terminated from the seat that he had on the board as the chairman. I think he still is a director, but was fired as the CEO because he arranged this loan that was linked to Russian oligarchs through a bank in the Caribbean island called Dominica from a bank called Paxum Bank that has these somewhat shady dealings. And that's how Trump media survived in December of 2021 into 2022 with this $8 million loan. SDNY is investigating that as well.
Wow. It's well, we're going to bring you back because I think next week there's going to be quite a bit going on. I mean, would be my suspicion, and I'll leave it as a cliffhanger. And for those of you who don't know, Ben has a legal podcast also with Michael Popak and Karen Agnifilo called Legal AF. What does the AF stand for, Ben?
AF stands for Analysis Friends. So the Legal Analysis Friends is Legal AF podcast. Also, check us out at the Midas Touch podcast. Subscribe to the Midas Touch podcast. Search wherever you get your audio podcast. Search for the Legal AF podcast. Search for Political Beatdown podcast. And you can also check us out at YouTube by searching Midas Touch. We're about to hit 1 million subscribers this week on our YouTube channel.
Wow, look at that. Look at that. Congratulations, Ben. Quite a feather in your cap. And to the listeners, Gary and I will be back on Sunday for the Sunday Altar of Bard. Thank you so much, Ben.
Great to be here, and shout out to all the Reasonable Doubt listeners, and shout out to the Midas Mighty.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ben. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to Reasonable Doubt. Subscribe on YouTube at youtube.com/Reasonable Doubt Podcast.